No.
now you can say it.
Oh, welcome to the Open Door Podcast. I'm Pastor Brian. This is Joe. Thanks for joining us tonight. And it is, we'll probably have this new time at 6 o'clock for a while because my son is in wrestling and he has meets often on Thursdays. But this gives me a time to go see him like tonight. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining me, Joe. You were just saying you don't feel great today. So
Yeah, under the weather, but I think that's there's a lot of folks who ain't feeling so hot right now. There's a lot of things that working their way around.
there is, and it doesn't seem to be COVID. It just is cold. It's like people didn't remember during the COVID year, like nobody got sick
Right.
with anything other than COVID.
Yeah, because everybody was covering up when they felt a little sick. They weren't going out in public. They were covering.
Isolating, wearing masks, the whole gig, and nope.
Yeah, it actually works. Yeah.
So now it's back with a vengeance. So this year, and it hasn't been bad. I had it a couple weeks ago. Pardon me, I'm about to cough.
Yeah.
And like you, it's not like I felt horrible. I just, not good.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's how everybody's feeling.
Yeah, Vanessa's fine. Just Sam and I. It's just one of those things where I spent most of the day on the couch watching YouTube videos. Cuddling with the dog.
And nice.
That's those are the times when I think of Psalm 23. He makes me lay down.
Makes me lay down.
Yes, definitely an emphasis on makes.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're joining us tonight. So, did you have a good weekend? I understand. Wasn't it your anniversary recently?
Well, kind of. I mean, our wedding anniversary is in September.
Okay.
And we had Thanksgiving is we Vanessa and I met during the Thanksgiving cruise.
Oh, so
25 years ago.
That's the anniversary you were celebrating this weekend.
No.
No? I thought you were celebrating your anniversary.
No, Sam had a disc golf tournament.
Gotcha. All right.
No.
Well, they sang happy anniversary to you on Sunday.
Yeah. Well, Dan Thompson, who most folks know because he's visited the church and he's helped us out with some stuff, sends me a note, happy anniversary. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, well, your pastor said, because he watches the service, he said that you were celebrating anniversary. I'm like,
That's what I thought I was told. So I'm just wrong.
yeah. No, Sam, it was his first real disc golf tournament and started at 8 a.m, so we had to get there about 7. And it rained. It was a big, messy day, but it was a lot of fun. He did really well.
Good. I'm glad and you guys all had, it sounds like from the post, you guys had a great time. So,
Yeah.
So what are we going to talk about? You weren't here on Sunday. So do you want to summarize what I did talk about? Do you want to talk about the last sermon you talked about? Where do you want to go with this tonight?
Well, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just talk a little bit about our holiday traditions and kind of how they align with our beliefs or don't align with our beliefs.
That's interesting.
Just the traditions that I grew up with, I've reflected that those were only like 3 or 4 years of my life that I hold so precious. When I think about being like between second grade and 5th grade or 4th grade or whatever, just kind of in that area. And Vanessa and I have lived here for nearly 20 years, and our traditions here have lasted much longer. But what are those traditions, and what do they even speak into faith?
What what do you mean by traditions? Just memories, or do you mean things that you have, almost rituals that you have to do? You mean closer to rituals, things you just have to do?
Yeah, just things that you do. When I was a kid, we would put on Arthur Fiedler and the Boston Pops, and we would, there were 4 kids, and we had a jump rope, and we would pretend that one person was Santa, one person was Rudolph, and then a couple of the kids were not. They were just the reindeers in the middle. We'd dance around the pool table, There would be one present you could open the night before we went to midnight mass because, of course, I grew up Catholic.
Right.
But those were just, when I reflect with fondness upon those times, those were the traditions there. But our traditions are different now.
Well, for me growing up, my folks were not religious really at all. I mean, they grew up in a, as I've said it before, kind of a Leave It to Beaver house, very 1950s, even though mom worked, kind of family. And so we did very 1950-ish kind of stuff, sort of. I mean, we would open a single present at the night before. Mom would make a huge amount of Christmas candy stuff. Weird things like divinity and peanut brittle and various types of fudge and just tons of stuff. And that was always in the house because that's what mom made every year. But other than us getting up super early on Sunday on Christmas morning, I mean like 5 o'clock in the morning, right? And we would have an orange in our stocking. That was really it for when I was young. I mean, a lot of family would come over. There is one tradition that I do remember, but it was really, again, it was interesting. It was only just a couple of years worth, but it meant so much to me. And that was after I was the only child left in the house, and Dad and I would go and get the Christmas tree.
Wow.
Yeah, and I don't know I think probably the only reason why it mattered so much is just me and Dad time.
Sure.
And I've done some of that with the boys, and I think they'll remember it because we've had a couple of memorable times, but other than that those were really our only quote unquote traditions. Yeah, you would do the normal, I guess it would be the normal thing of having brunch, on Christmas morning, that's with a ham probably. So yeah, that's really it. But church, no, not until I was in high school and on my own track as being a Christian, where I'd go to Christmas Christmas Eve service, but not my folks. So.
Well, so your next oldest sibling, I think, was Steve, right?
Right.
And he's
3 years older.
3 years older. So that's not a ton older. Because I think about Sam, who is 14, and Marissa is 28. So in many ways, Sam is an only child.
Right.
We still our current traditions are wrapped around all of us being together and treating both of the kids like kids, spoiling them, trying to find things to just build memories, create experiences, so that when we reflect on those photos, that we just like, oh, that's right. I think to me that is worth more than just about anything. But I can completely relate to and appreciate how special it would be for you to get to go do that with your dad. So how old were you when you got to do that?
Well, Steve was out of the household, so I had to have been in high school at that. It was probably my, the sophomore to senior in high school, probably those 3 years, maybe 4 or 5 years, really, a couple of years afterwards. Because the first year after high school, I actually stayed at home and went to community college. So I would say at least that. So yeah, somewhere in that area, 3 to 6 years. But, late teens. So it's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's not too late to have significant moments, even in late teens.
Yeah. And I had a lot of significant moments with my dad when I was that age, that even though I had a lot of siblings, my dad and he'd come home from work and we would go for a walk together because he was trying to exercise. So we'd take the dog out. And for whatever reason, it was just the two of us. And, those are things that are really special, where it's not just you're a kid, you're starting to kind of move into that almost a friendship kind of connection with your dad. And I imagine that was really important to him, that tradition because you were the last kid. I don't know if you and your dad had ever had a chance to talk about that.
Oh, no. That wasn't my dad. He never. My dad, growing up, and it was a painful point early in my life, was that he never once, when I was young, said he loved me. Never once. I don't even remember him calling me son, really, when I was younger. Now, I got to college. I matured both, emotionally, and I started saying, I love you, Dad. And then he started saying, and then he would say it all the time. Right.
Interesting.
And the same thing with calling me his son all the time. So it was at the time, in my early 20s, just like, why doesn't he say this stuff? But that was long ago erased. But my point was, yeah, he never talked about that stuff. He was never a mushy feely kind of guy. But I know he was deeply sensitive, but he would never talk about it, probably because of his growing.
Yeah.
Because how old was your dad? When was he born? When was your dad born?
43.
Yeah. See, your dad is significantly younger than my dad. My dad was born in 33.
Right.
And so it's a different, even that, there's a difference in generation to a degree. You just don't talk about that stuff. It's a little bit like your grandpa, I suppose. You're just different.
Yeah. And that 10 years is enough that, you are growing up and you have these formative years while World War II is occurring. And
the Great Depression.
Right. When people are coming back, they're not necessarily encouraged to be sharing and that.
Oh, you don't want to talk about that stuff because that's, painful memories. You don't talk about touchy-feely stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So he never really did. The older he got, the more he would, but certainly not when he was young. But you mentioned something earlier that it's interesting that, we're becoming, in the high school area, they're becoming more of a friendship level kind of a relationship. And for, I don't know for you, but for me, that's been a hard transition to shift from, having the answers, needing to be the one that you need to tell me where you're doing and what you're going and who you're with and all this to being a lot more hands off and just letting them, take the training wheels off and let them run. And that's been a challenge for me, but Dad did that so effortlessly. I don't know how he did. Maybe because I was the youngest and he had already gone through it two other times. Probably. It just, I don't know how he did what he did. I don't know. It's amazing.
I have the benefit, I suppose, of because Vanessa works so much with teenagers. And has a lot of insight that I don't have into that because, I've only got 2 to reflect on, plus the kids that I coach.
Right.
And I do find myself going, oh, Sam's just easy. He's just a nice kid. He's polite. He works hard. We're spoiled. He's not typical. So when I get around kids that are typical, I'm like, oh. And there's a desire to kind of, I want to influence, right? I want to help develop character and that stuff. And then alongside of that, I want to build memories and experiences. And those are not necessarily contraindicative. Those can both happen at the same time. And I think that's and probably what your dad did well and what my dad did well is, he, I think, tried less to be the influencer and more to build experiences. Let's go camping. Let's go for a walk. Let's go do these things together. And then that became like, I get to have this connection without feeling controlled or the sense of additional authority. I don't know how we got on this topic talking about...
I don't know.
Yeah.
I do want to say one thing that I'm glad you just reminded me of what Dad said about, well, because he only knew boys. He says, boys are easy. Says all you got to do, you do your job for the first decade, and then after that, things take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. You know, if you've done your job right up to this point, then just trust that you've done your job right, and just trust them and move on.
Yeah. Well, there's that nature versus nurture conversation. I mean, you build them up, and then at some point, no matter how much control you feel like you can or should assert,
you got to let go.
Yeah, a lot of that's kind of out of your control.
It is, you know, but and my boys are amazing. They really are. They make such good choices. Once in a while, they does something dumb, but that's okay. They're almost 17. They're going to be, and so you just got to trust that they're going to make the right calls. And even if they make mistakes, they'll learn from them, and then you move on. So I don't know. So I think we got on this topic because of just memories and family. Mm-hmm. And that really is the main thing for most people when it comes to Christmas. Is it's a time about family. It's a family. It almost should not be called Christmas anymore. It should be called a family time, because that's what it is for our culture.
Yeah, there's like three things going on. We've got obviously celebrating Christ's birth. We have the gathering of family in this protected kind of way, right? We've all, as a culture, decided that this is when we're going to get together, right? And so people recognize you're going to take time off of work. They expect it. And then you have obviously the commercial element, the marketing, and all of those things, and those all three kind of come together. Right. You know, I know, like, for me, it was very hard to distinguish between, I mean, I knew that Jesus was different than Santa Claus, but everything that was marketed to me,
Santa.
Right, it was Santa. But, I mean, you would have, like, the Peanuts Christmas special, which was unapologetically focused on Christ's birth. And, you know, those are the things that I get nostalgic for. I don't care as much about the different Santa Claus things. I'm like, whatever. I do care about, you know, the three wise men and understanding those stories and but that's me at 52. You know,
when did it switch where you started to, or maybe you always had, realize, wait a minute, there's a lot more significance here than just simply family? Because for me growing up, it was like, oh, this is a time to get presents and be with family. And I would say at least until I'm about 20, even 5 or 6 years after being a Christian, before I really realized, wait a minute, there's something much more significant that we're supposed to be remembering here. What about you? Was it always?
No.
You always remember that?
I think there were two different times. When I was 15, sophomore in high school, I do remember going to visit my grandparents, which we would rotate between which grandparents we would spend Christmas with. And that was kind of the time beginning to recognize that, you know, some of them had already passed on, and that getting together was more important than the stuff. But then, you know, as I kind of struck out independent in my, you know, 1920, early 20s or whatever, I really was the opposite. I'm just like, I don't want to be around my family. I want to be on my own. I found family problematic. My parents had divorced, you know, by then, and so there wasn't those traditions. The gathering was different because it was fractured. So you were almost choosing sides. So are you going to be with dad? Or are you going to be with mom?
That's just painful. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just easier to say, I'm going to work. I would take shifts on at the restaurant on Christmas Eve, so I had an excuse not to get together. And it really wasn't until, you know, probably 27 where, you know, as I got my life together and felt more independent and stuff, that I'm like, you know, I really want to be with my family more. it there was kind of a pause in there for 7-8 years when it just wasn't that important to get together. And really Thanksgiving became more of that family gathering time than Christmas. Christmas became, this is my little circle getting together.
I remember you saying that. Yeah. That Thanksgiving has turned into, that's the wide family moment, and Christmas is the nuclear, really just you four.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our traditions at Christmas are all kind of built around that, and they're silly. I mentioned at the beginning, how does faith tie into this? And I said that because I'm reflecting, and I'm like, not a lot. We do have things like, the service, and that, singing Christmas carols,
But it's not a lot. There's not a lot to it.
There's not a lot. Excuse me. No, there's not a lot to it.
And you're normal. You're very common. It's very common for having the same thing. Yeah.
So for us, we call it our favorite things dinner. And on Christmas Eve, you decide as an individual, like maybe for Sam it's pepperoni pizza. For me, it's fried rice from can't remember the name of the P.F. Chang's, fried rice. Vanessa when she could eat shellfish, she would have Dungeness or whatever. And so we all just kind of get something special for us, and we eat it and we share it, and we have this kind of extravagant little feast. And then we also do the $10 shopping spree at Walmart, where Christmas Eve everybody gets $10 per person, and you buy some completely garbage gift for the person, like something when you open it you go, well, this is going right in the garbage. I mean, like,
oh, geez.
So occasionally there's some thought behind it, but usually it's like, oh, Dad's going to hate this. I'm going to buy this for him. Here's a shirt that he'll never wear. But it's fun because you're going in and thinking, you do have to think about the person and think about not necessarily what they're going to like about it, but what they're not going to like about it. And so it kind of reinforces knowing each other a bit more, I guess.
For $10.
For $10.
That is funny. Yeah, and that's wonderful. It's and it's a great question of how do you put faith into Christmas, and I think that's a great question for most people. If I had not had the path I had, I don't think faith would have been a part of my Christmas very much either. And it certainly isn't the case for my brothers at all. Christmas has nothing to do with faith, and it's just family. And there's a lot of friends I know that Christmas has nothing to do with faith. So how do you, even if they believe, how do you infuse some of it? I know some people read the Christmas story. That feels so cliche. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, but maybe in the comments, if you guys could give us some sense of what are ways that you've been able to kind of infuse a little bit of the Christmas story, the amazing coming of Jesus into your Christmas traditions. I would love to hear some ideas, because I think that'd be an important thing to try and figure out.
Especially as much as we, I mean, I'm including myself in this, tend to gripe about how the commercialism that surrounds it. What are we doing? Not outside of our house, but within our own kind of family unit. What are we doing?
Even if it's just within the small nucleus, yeah.
Are we doing anything around that? And I feel very convicted around that. How do we make that important outside of putting up the lights and setting up the tree and having German pancakes for breakfast or whatever?
Which again is all wonderful stuff and great memories, but it doesn't really have anything to do with Jesus. Not really, not directly. So it's interesting. Yeah, I don't have an answer to that, but and I had a thought, but I completely lost it. Christmas. What was it? Oh my goodness, I can't remember what it was. I really had a thought. So, anyways, I just think that would be a good thing. Trying to figure out a way to do that is because so few people do, and I don't. I mean, maybe I need to talk about that more on Sundays as ways that you can do it. But I think that'd be good.
You think about like the Elf on the Shelf, right? It's a relatively new thing, and
right.
So many people have made room for that. It's good for the mother and daughter who came up with that idea and sold it and have done very well off of that. And when I see that, I go, okay, well, that's a tradition that was created. Go ahead, you remembered it.
I loathe the commercialization of Christmas. I loathe that. I even have gotten to the point where I don't even like commercialization for my own birthday. This year, for example, I told my people, don't buy me gifts. I don't want any gifts from people. I'm going to give you gifts. And they were just little gifts, little things that made me think about them. Call it a Hobbit birthday and it's the same thing is like, so what, but it's like Thanksgiving. It's like Valentine's. If you don't do it, you're horrible.
Right.
Right. But it's just greed. And parents feel so obligated to give so many gifts. Half the time, they know the kid will open it and go, yay, and then put it aside, and then they'll think about it again for 2 weeks. It's like, oh.
See, I grew up a little better in that regard, in that I remember like going through the wish book, the series, right? And circling things. And one of them was this G.I. Joe playset, and it was $100. And my dad looked at it and said, there's no way I'm going to spend $100 on a toy.
Oh, see, my mom did. She broke her back trying to give us everything.
Yeah.
Even though we weren't poor, we weren't rich. But yeah. I don't know. It would be wonderful to try to have a Christmas where there's so very little very little gifts given, and because if you want to try and infuse whether it's family meaning or you want to have religious meaning, commercialization seems to get in the way of both. So I don't know.
It's a distraction,
It really is.
And
because both are thinking about yourself.
Well, I remember, and not to belabor all this stuff, but I knew when it was Christmas season when the Payless commercials would come on. Merry Christmas from Payless.
Payless, Merry Christmas.
And I knew it was Christmas season, and there's something really kind of special to me, and when they don't play that anymore, obviously because Payless doesn't exist anymore. It's now Rite Aid. But there's like those little things that kind of trigger that. Yeah. And I'd love to kind of create those triggers.
Yeah.
But have them centered around Christ and less about commercialism. That's a stretch goal.
It's a stretch goal. Yeah. So for both of us, let's see if we can try and find something, and I hope we get some good feedback in the comments about ways they've infused it, or ways you're thinking about and trying to infuse just a little bit more meaning in a season that has less and less meaning, and it's just that we could do better. We can do better. We need it. So,
amen.
Well, thanks for joining us tonight, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation, this rambling conversation about Christmas. Thanks for the topic, Joe. It was a great idea, and we'll see you guys on Sunday.
I'll see you on Sunday. Stay out of trouble.
All right. Good luck.
Take care.
Bye.